I used to be a narcissist. 40 years ago, when I got clean and sober, my entire world was about me. I was just telling a friend today, I really feel sorry for the people that were my friends the first 5 years of my sobriety. They would have to listen to me talk about myself incessantly. I was very important. So, in my own mind, of course. It's an interesting topic, narcissism. I think it engenders a lot of confusion. So you can read some resources that'll tell you there's 4 types of narcissism, others that'll tell you there's 6. Some will say there's 5. I'm going to read the one that says 5 types just because that's the one I'm most familiar with, and it's the one that I think makes the most sense because I have been one of those, and I can fit other people into the other ones pretty easily. And before I go through the various different types of narcissism there is, I want to say that I practice internal family systems, both personally and professionally. So I don't actually think people are just one thing. I've never met anybody who was, for instance, a malignant narcissist who wasn't also codependent. So I think it's just really crucial that we start seeing each other as this kind of an amalgamation of different parts that have some functional aspects and some incredibly toxic aspects. So how did I get past the narcissism? That's a pretty common path for people who get into 12-step recovery. They have to do the 12 steps, which means they have to make a searching and fearless moral inventory of themselves, and they have to take responsibility for the things that they've done, and then they have to go make a step 9, which is an amends to people. And that's a rigorous process that really humbles you and gets you in touch with the fact that you've damaged other people's lives. So I've been through all that, and I continue to work the steps. I continue to go to meetings, and it's been 40 years. I'm really grateful for that. If somebody has narcissistic traits, though, they might not actually be somebody who has narcissistic personality disorder. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So as for those 5 types of narcissism, you've got your arrogant narcissist, who is somebody with a grandiose sense of self-importance. I think I had some of that. A defensive, fragile, and sensitive to criticism narcissist is probably a covert narcissist. And then you've got the antagonistic narcissist, somebody who belittles and explicits others for personal gain. Kind of dangerous people. I've never been that person. Communal, inflated self-view, and attached to perceived likability. I think guilty as charged in my first few years of sobriety. In fact, I used to call myself Miss AA. I had so many friends and everybody liked me, but all I did was talk about myself. Okay, and then we've got the malignant narcissist, and that's somebody who's aggressively malicious and is indifferent morally. They don't really have a conscience per se, nor do they have empathy. Okay. So those are 5 categories. You're going to find other ones online. But here's the most important distinction that I want to make for you. I want to make the distinction between somebody who has narcissistic behaviors, like myself when I first got sober, and some of the people you may know, whether they're influencers or just very aggressive in the workplace, or a bad boyfriend or girlfriend who is gaslighting you and putting themselves first and doesn't seem to care much about you. Do they have NPD, Narcissistic Personality Disorder? That's a whole other level. And the way that I have experienced NPD in other human beings is that they are incapable of tolerating the slightest criticism about themselves. So obviously, people who are narcissistic and self-centered and get into 12-step recovery aren't those people. They have to do a personal inventory. They have to get humble. They have to make amends. The person who can't do that might have NPD. And the way I understand it is that it's a trauma response. So you take a young child of 2, and they are all narcissistic. It's actually a really important stage in human development that we go through a stage of being all about ourselves. And that's kind of one of the reasons we call them the terrible 2s. So, but a very deeply abused and traumatized child will get stuck there, and then they grow up and they're still there. They're still basically 2 years old. And their entire world revolves around manipulating and controlling other people's perceptions of them, of avoiding all responsibility, of predicating their entire existence around deeply disturbing lies that are completely opposite of reality, gaslighting the people around them, manipulating the people around them, undermining the self-confidence and perceptions of the people around them. Now, those people with NPD have a really hard time experiencing any empathy, particularly for the people that they abuse. They almost feel nothing because the entire goal is to achieve control over other human beings. And like I said, there's a lot of people who are narcissistic who are not traumatized to that degree, and they are not trying to control every human being in their orbit. They might be trying to present themselves as the most important thing in the room, and they might kind of suck the air out of the room. But that's a very far cry from the person who is incredibly devious and manipulative. So I don't know if you've ever met somebody who had narcissistic personality disorder. It's really damning. Those people don't get into 12-step recovery because that would require them to be accountable. And they don't get into therapy because they can't be honest. Now, sometimes they might go kicking and screaming to therapy because a spouse pulled them into it. But usually the experience that the spouse that tried to get them into therapy is going to have is they put on a really good show for the therapist, and they are on their best behavior, and they're just so amazing. And then when you get back home with them, they're a total creep. So, yeah, I think my dad probably had NPD because he abused my mom, he sexually abused my sister and I, and he didn't seem to experience any empathy at all. No remorse and no empathy. And he could kill animals without batting an eye. And that's actually not true. He seemed to enjoy it. So there are some very sick people that I have not just met, but in my family, and also had extended relationships with. You don't grow up being abused and then go trot off and have a healthy relationship. You tend to get into relationships that are very much like the one you came from. And in my home, we were always walking on eggshells, trying not to upset Dad so that he wouldn't get violent. And I'm sure quite a few of you could probably relate to that too. So if you have a narcissist in your life right now today, first of all, I am so sorry. It is, to me, one of the most painful things I can think of, is loving somebody who is that cruel and that self-centered. And if you spot narcissistic traits in yourself, you're probably not somebody who's got narcissistic personality disorder. Especially not if you want to work on them and change them and maybe get into therapy for it. That's probably not an advanced case. So if you're noticing narcissistic traits in your partner or in a family member, try to get a little more familiar with the different types of narcissism, because if it's not NPD, if it's not full-blown narcissistic personality disorder, you might be able to work with them, talk to them, ask them to get into therapy, point out to them how oppressive their behavior is. And I am grateful for all the people in my past who helped me see how self-centered and selfish I was. And I hope that we can all become more loving, more kind, more giving, and definitely more empathetic. Please leave some comments below. Don't forget to like, because the more times we get likes and definitely subscribes, the more this video gets out there.